You're listening to the University of Liverpool Podcast, brought to you by the University of Liverpool online programs. Make a plan to advance your career today. Study a postgraduate degree with a world-class university without leaving your home or full-time job. You don't have to go far to go further.
Welcome to the University of Liverpool Podcast. I'm Neil Morrison.
So my clearest memory of a child with psychopathy is a case that I worked on when I was working for New Orleans clinic that we had, and it was for assessment of children that were having problems in schools.
This is Luna Centofanti. She is a senior lecturer in developmental psychology at the University of Liverpool. Her focus is on psychopathy in children. Psychopathy is a research term. Most people outside academia use the term psychopath. In 2003, Dr. Centofanti was working towards her PhD at the University of New Orleans. She was working at a clinic where they assessed children who were getting into trouble at school.
This one was a girl, which is notable and sticks out in my mind because usually you find boys with conduct problems and who are, cruel and manipulative and bullying other kids more often and who are more aggressive, right? Boys are usually more aggressive. But this was a girl, and she was barely even 9 years old, which is kind of early for showing aggressive bullying, conduct problem behavior. And she struck me as someone who is very polite and kind when I talked to her. In all of the sessions, she was really sweet, but the sweetness was a bit bitter, like in my mouth a bit, because she was so overly polite and overly wanting to get on my good favor. So that struck me right away. And then when I talked to the teacher, it became clear why she was there. The teacher explained, had a really striking contrast to what I saw in my first session in the clinic with this girl. So the teacher said that she was she'd stabbed another kid in the hand with a pencil. She threatened her teacher with violence, and then wrote her a note saying, "I'm so sorry. I'm just gonna change the name. I'm so sorry, Miss Green. I love you," or something like this. And the teacher just found it very kind of chilling. She also didn't kind of believe that this child was sorry, and described her being very aggressive and hitting other kids and getting suspended a lot. And when I met her, she, I asked her about it. I said, "Do you hit other kids?" She readily admitted it. Didn't say that she said she didn't care if she got into trouble because, she always got into trouble. It didn't really matter. She was just going to get suspended anyway. And she described her favorite movie as Jeepers Creepers, a horror movie, R-rated, and said that she thought that it was, a true representation of what real life is like, which I thought was odd. And she did describe that she was aggressive with other kids and that she didn't feel bad when she hurt other kids badly. Sometimes would kick other kids under the table and all the while smiled at the teacher. And so that kind of, it's almost cold and calculating kind of
And duplicitous.
personality. Yes.
So this whole assessment process takes a really long time. It's hours and hours of tests and interviews. And at the end of it all, as a reward, the child is allowed to choose a toy from a toy box.
So I said, pick out a toy. And I was talking to her parents, and then she picked out 2 toys, and she was like, "I really want these 2 toys." And I was like, "Well, no, you have to pick one." So I was talking to her parents again. She came back out. She had 1 toy in her hand. And I noticed that she had her coat ready to go, draped over her other arm. And they left. And I looked in the room and I looked in the box and just to make sure that everything had been put away into the box. But I noticed that the second toy that she said she hadn't chosen wasn't around. And I looked out the window that looks over the parking lot and I saw her with her coat take off her coat off her arm and she had the second toy under her arm. So, I mean, part of the conduct disorder diagnosis includes things like theft and deceitful behavior. So that clinched it for me, and also the fact that I wanted her to get the treatment that she actually needed.
Okay, before we go any further, we should probably take a moment to review what the term psychopathy means.
Um, well, psychopathy, it's more of a research diagnosis. So, it's not in the diagnostic statistical manual that the American Psychiatric Association puts out. The psychopathy is a research diagnosis that was pretty much spearheaded by Hervey Cleckley in the 1940s, 50s, where he described adults with a personality disorder that was, this kind of glibness, antisocial behavior to some extent, lack of remorse, lack of guilt, lack of empathy, uh, charming, manipulative, egocentric, and grandiose, really selfish, looking out for number one.
Right.
And then Robert Hare really then came to look at it in terms of in a research way and built a checklist.
Over time, that checklist was studied and tested and refined, and eventually researchers began to zero in on callous and unemotional traits.
We wanted something that would allow us to kind of predict who was going to have the more extreme or more severe problem behaviors in the future. And callous and emotional traits were the ones that kind of allowed us to do that.
So would someone with callous and unemotional traits, would they show emotions? Would they show fear or anger?
Yeah, that's something that struck me in kind of descriptions of people with psychopathy. So even adults who kind of show the features of psychopathy. So John Gottman, I know, did some research on couples and male batterers, for example, and those who kind of showed those psychopathic features, who were male batterers, their wives, when they had a little altercation with them in the lab, when they were asked to, argue about something that you usually argue about in your everyday marriage. The ones with these psychopathic features, their wives said that they were really angry, so that they looked really angry. Their face and their voice all showed indications of, extreme anger. But then when they looked at the heart rate of these individuals while they were arguing, their heart rates went down. And in my study with a detention center sample of boys from New Orleans, what I showed was that when they were kind of provoked by a peer that they were playing a competitive game with, they were aggressive in response to provocation. So they had this kind of retribution attitude, but their sweating from their palms went down. Usually, when people get angry, their heart rate increases, their skin, increases in sweating. You get hot under the collar. They don't seem to do that. They seem to say cool as a cucumber at the same time that they're, planning being aggressive. So although they might show the outward signs of anger or aggression, they seem to do it with a kind of disconnect from emotional arousal that you would expect internally.
Are they just acting it then? Are they just pretending?
That's a good question. I mean, it could be that that they learn to do these things, right? That they see other people get rewarded for showing anger, and so they go, "Oh, I see the outward part of that anger. I will put that on like you do a shirt, and do it while it's getting me my reward, and then just take it off when when I don't need the reward anymore."
Hmm. What age does it start to show up in children?
So the research that has been done by some people in America and other places has shown that you can measure at about 2 or 3 years of age. And it does predict, conduct problems a year or two later. So, but in talking to other researchers personally, we kind of agree around, 3 or 4 is probably where you're going to more reliably see it, right? You
Hmm.
can start to see some of the features where you're kind of going, could be at age 2, but not definitive. I would say, and then speaking to other people, we kind of agree about 3 or 4 when you're starting to see where you're starting to see those reliable ways where kids are showing a conscience. Some of the research on conscience development says around 3 or 4, you can do things like, go up to a child and say, "Oh, the experimenter, my colleague has just, drawn this really pretty picture. Do you want to help me rip it up?" Wouldn't that be funny to rip it up? And you start to see kids get kind of uncomfortable with that idea around 3, 4, 5, that they start to show this kind of, I don't know that I want to rip up another person's drawing. I'll just rip this tiny, tiny corner, or that kind of thing. So they start to show those kind of uncomfortable feelings that we associate with having a conscience or
Hmm.
guilt.
So, for the most part, empathy is one of those things you're regularly teaching your child, especially a young child. You're constantly saying, don't pull the dog's fur like that, and don't pull its tail, and and you can't do that to your sister. You're constantly giving these little cues to tell them how to see things from the other animal or the other person's point of view. So it's this steady building process that I think most parents are pretty familiar with. So, how much of psychopathy is a result of parenting, that parenting hasn't been able to or failed to focus on developing empathy and understanding of other people's emotional world?
I mean, we know a lot about parenting, and one thing that we know is that parents seem to kind of give up and become stressed by having children that show these kind of problem behaviors, aggression, bullying, not listening to their parents, in addition to not caring,
Mm.
right? So parents say that kids with these traits don't respond to punishment like timeout. What parents said was happening is that the kids with these callous unemotional features, when they put them into timeout, they just calmly sat in timeout. And when they came out of timeout, they engaged in the behavior all over again.
Mm.
And they didn't seem distressed by being put into timeout, whereas most kids are kind of like, no, 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 I don't want to go into timeout. These kids didn't seem distressed by that. So, I mean, one of the things that would happen from that is that parents would then give up using. Why would you use a kind of punishment technique that's not working? So it would seem that, at an early age, if parents are noticing that timeout doesn't work, they're probably going to stop doing it. And if they don't have other tools in their toolbox, if we haven't given parents, something else to use, it means that children with these features are going to go unchecked
Mm.
from an early age. So, one thing that we know about that is that, yeah, parents do seem to feel distressed by, these kids having these traits, and they do seem to kind of back off, and probably don't use other things to kind of make up for that. Also, we know that from research from things that I've been doing with Liz Means, looking at mind-mindedness. So, how much do parents talk about their child's emotions and thoughts? How do parents understand their child's mental states, and do they talk about it?
Mm. As in, asking them what is going on and how are you feeling and things like that?
Yeah, or even telling the child how they're feeling, right? So if you have a 4 month old, 5 month old, 6 month old, you're not going to be able to ask them how they're feeling, but you're going to be telling them. So you're going to be saying things like, "Oh, you're cranky, aren't you?" Or,
Mm.
"Oh, you really like that toy up there. You keep looking at it. You keep eyeing that toy up there. You want that teddy? You want that teddy. You like that teddy."
Mhm.
That sort of thing. So you can hear parents doing that as they're playing with them. And one thing that we did was to have them, parents and child, come into the lab, give them a bunch of toys, and give them some free play time and look at how much parents talk about the thoughts and feelings of that child. But not only that, but how much they're appropriately doing that. So a lot of parents might be completely inaccurate if you or I were looking at them and going, well, actually, that child doesn't look cranky to me. It looks like you drop them a bit onto their belly and they're, you know, obviously upset. So not that they're cranky. So we can start to look at whether parents are actually accurate
Mhm.
in the way that they talk about mental states.
Right. Well, if you're a child and you have a parent who is able to accurately describe the feeling that you're having, so you're feeling scared right now, and you think that happens many times, and you think, oh, okay, okay. At some point, it clicks. Oh, you know what? I think this is that fear thing my parents keep talking about, and then that helps you to make the next step, which would be to recognize it in other people.
Yeah.
They're afraid. Okay, I remember what that afraid thing is.
Hmm.
Whereas I guess if you have parents who are chronically misidentifying your emotional state, like when you're afraid, saying you're angry or you're just being difficult,
Yes.
you start to be confused about what that actually means and what being afraid is and what this feeling is inside you. Is that right?
Yeah.
Have I got
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, you've got it exactly correct. The other thing I would add is that, I mean, think about also the internal state of that child when they're told, that they're angry when they're actually afraid or something like this. It means that the parent can't support them through the emotion that they're actually feeling.
Mhm.
So there's that kind of double, not only are you then not able to read that emotion in yourself or read it in other people, but you're also left with that feeling unsupported. You're left with it all alone. Really,
Mhm.
you have no kind of anchor.
It does sound, though, like there may be a genetic component to it in that you sort of talk about, yes, obviously there's this uh, parents responding to their child, but it also does seem like their child is a bit different than the baseline child in its reactions or how it's moving through the world at a very early stage. So, is there a genetic component to it?
Yeah, some of the early work by Essie Vitting has been looking at twin studies.
Okay, let's pause quickly here just to review how twin studies work. Identical twins share 100% of the same genes. Siblings, or fraternal twins, on the other hand, share just 50% of the same genes. So, if you want to discover if a particular trait is genetic, one way to do this is to compare identical twins to fraternal twins. If a trait is strongly genetic, then it should be something identical twins share. And you should notice that identical twins share it more often than fraternal twins. And that's a very simplistic explanation, but it'll do for now. We'll get a geneticist on sometime down the road. So, anyways, researchers looking into psychopathy have been doing twin studies.
And what you find is that there's about estimated about 80% of the variance comes from genes for callous, unemotional traits with that kind of conduct problem behavior. And conduct problem behavior that doesn't have those callous, unemotional features is about 40 to 50, 60%
Mhm.
genetics. So there's quite a difference between those two groups. So you might say, yes, these kind of psychopathic like features are more genetic. Um, but within those figures, and talk to any behavior genetic researcher, they know that within that genetic variance that they're estimating, a lot of that is gene environment interactions, gene environment correlation. So, like you said, a parent that shares those features with their child is going to behave in a way that is similar to the way that the child would behave, right? And they probably wouldn't use the best parenting techniques. And so, we can't estimate that unless we, kind of randomly assigned a child to whatever parent, right? We took all the children and we went, okay, you have that parent, you have that parent, and just randomly did it. Um,
Sort of like a psychopathic study on psychopathy.
exactly. Yeah, not that none of us have ever thought of doing it. No, right. Very unethical. So the only way that we can kind of do that naturalistically is, sometimes parents put their children up for adoption, and so there has been some work that has just been published again last year and this year, looking at whether there are features that are shared by the biological parent with the biological child, and then how much does uh, adoptive parenting techniques buffer the child from these kind of genetic features, right? And actually, with a study showed that a biologically fearless mom was associated with a biologically fearless child, even though, that child was adopted out from an early age. And that fearlessness in the child actually was related to callous unemotional features at age, I think it was 2 or 3 in this study. So it does seem like the fearlessness in the parent made the child fearless biologically because they share the same genes. And then that child went on to have callous unemotional features. But one of the buffers to that was having an adoptive parent who was very warm and responsive to the child. So you can buffer that biological risk by having an adoptive parent who is very warm.
But that sounds encouraging, and it's certainly more encouraging than a recent Atlantic Monthly article on childhood psychopathy that said for parents, the diagnosis can be akin to being told your child is dying because there are no treatments for this and the child's path is set.
Mm.
Are you more optimistic that effective therapies will be developed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people say psychopaths can't be helped, they can't be treated. The research literature going back decades shows that in some cases they get worse and they drop out of treatment. And, it's just very pessimistic for whether we can make a difference in adults with psychopathy's lives. And I think one of the things that I've come to understand in reading the research literature is that, we know that people with psychopathy take up or make up 20% of the prison population. So, but they make up 1% of the community. Okay, so they are overrepresented in prison, but they're not 100% of the prison population, right? They're still a minority within the prison. So, who are we going to build treatment programs for? The majority of the prison population who are there for being hot blooded, right? Hot under the collar, getting into bar fights, or who are there because they don't because they are impulsive generally, because they made poor decisions, all those types of reasons. So what are we going to build for those people? Things that work on anger management, things that work on good decision making with kind of building rational thinking and skills based training, right? So we're going to build treatment programs like that. None of those are going to work with the people or aren't going to be useful for the people with psychopathy. They don't have anger management problems. Their skill set is quite good. And, countless numbers of studies have shown that they're of average intelligence in prison. So they don't need the kinds of programs that have been developed for the majority of the prison population. So we built these programs and then we rolled them out to all people in the prison. And then we went, look, this 20% aren't getting any better. They're just incurable. when we've never presented interventions or treatment programs for them that would actually work for them. So yeah, I think the pessimism is because we've never tried. It's like I think from the Simpsons quote, like we've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas. um, so I think we need to develop better treatment programs for them, and there have been some nice developments within detention centers, within prisons, and yeah, within kind of adolescence, late adolescence, or adults. You're looking at at least 2, 3, 4, 5 year programs to be able to make a change for them.
Well, that's so hopeful.
Yeah.
And how about for children?
I mean, for children, like I said, that warm parenting works for younger children. Probably this kind of mind-mindedness might be another intervention that works. And I know Liz Means is piloting some like an app. Again, it makes me think of The Simpsons, where they kind of point the thing at Maggie and it tells exactly what she's thinking and feeling. If we can develop an app where we then go, here's what your child is thinking and feeling, parents can then act accordingly and be able to support their children through those feelings.
I sign me up for that app when it's developed.
Right. There's an app for that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for chatting with me. It's been great.
Luna Centofanti is a senior lecturer in developmental psychology at the University of Liverpool. And that's it for the University of Liverpool podcast. Please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. And please share the podcast with your friends, or give us a review or a rating on iTunes. It's not just great for us to hear your thoughts, but ratings, reviews, they all really help other people to find the podcast. I'm Neil Morrison. Thanks so much for listening.
You're listening to the University of Liverpool podcast, brought to you by the University of Liverpool online programs. Make a plan to advance your career today. Study a postgraduate degree with a world-class university without leaving your home or full-time job. You don't have to go far to go further.